specific constitutional rights, which is very unique. That includes the right to operate businesses, which is very unique, but everything also related to initiative and referenda. It's not in every state that local residents can put something on a local ballot, a city matter. In a lot of states, they might be able, maybe able to put things on a state election, like a state law, but they might not be able to put it on the local ballot. So that's very, very unique, because they believed, especially in a state like Arizona, where back then, everything geographically, we were so spread out and a lot of communities were isolated, they really thought that local governments were the core. And so I had to throw in my little constitution part there, but that is very unique about Arizona. So this is the part about public meetings. So public meetings, there's kind of all sorts of different areas we could have gone, and I included way too many slides just so everyone can have them if you want to read them and you want to watch some of those videos, but we're not going to cover everything. We'll kind of cover the big picture items. In terms of public meetings, you have the rules that govern procedure, and then you have like the more substance rule, things like open meeting law and having to publish a notice and the agenda and things like, how many votes are required to pass certain items, or what's an executive session, things like that. So those are more like substance rules, and then you have like the procedural type of rules, like how do you make a motion, when can you make a motion, and that kind of thing. We're going to cover kind of both sides of it. We're going to start just in general. We're going to talk about open meeting law. And I think the one thing that's really important to know, especially for residents, is a lot of times there's a belief that a council meeting, yes, of course, it is an opportunity for citizens to be heard, but the real purpose of a public meeting when it comes to council is to effectively run your city. This is when they can actually govern, where they make these important decisions. And technically, when you read Arizona law, the public has a right to attend, but there's nothing that says that the public has a right to participate or speak at a meeting, unless it's something specific like a zoning hearing. So when City Council puts a call to the public, and we're going to go over that, technically they're not required to, but councils like to hear from their residents, and they like to have public hearings to hear from their citizens. But the real core purpose of a council meeting is to actually run the city as the municipal corporation, approving budgets, approving contracts, talking about policy. Those are things that the core of a council meeting is. So,
and I think you could expand that too to say the core of open meeting law is to make sure that government in Arizona conducts its business in the light of day. Right?
Exactly. And transparency. And that's the whole point, is we want to make sure when they are making these decisions about the municipal corporation, about your town, that you get to see it transparently, see it in action. And so that is the purpose. And so this is the main rule for open meeting law, is that all meetings and all these terms are kind of defined, shall be open to the public, and you'll have a right to attend and hear the deliberations, and that all legal actions, we'll kind of go over all those terms, must be done at the public meeting. So city councils can't make a decision as a body behind closed doors. They're going to have to do it in a public meeting.
So this is a snark moment number one. So you'll see public body. Seems to me the Arizona legislature would be a public body. The problem is the Arizona Constitution gives the House and Senate the authority to establish their own rules on how they conduct their business. So shockingly, our Arizona legislature has chosen to adopt rules that are not as strict as the rules that the town of Superior must follow.
Yes. Transparency for thee, but right.
But not for me.
Exactly, and that's the core that all means public body. The word public body is pretty much anyone that's elected or appointed in terms of like a city or a town. So it includes your planning commissioners, or if your council appoints a subcommittee. If they're appointed by your council as a public body, they will be subject to open meeting law. So all of these requirements will also apply to them. There might be cases where a subcommittee maybe is only made up of one council member with maybe staff. That's where your attorney will kind of say, this does fall under the open meeting law, this might not necessarily fall under open meeting law, but those are pretty rare cases. For the most part, if you're talking about planning commission, the council, they will be subject to open meeting law. So the core is meetings have to be accessible to the public. So when, when there was the closures due to the pandemic, we didn't even know really as cities, like, what do we do? Can we do virtual meetings? We weren't quite sure how to do that and whether it was even allowed under open meeting law. And the Attorney General, Brnovich at the time, issued an opinion saying, yes, you can have virtual meetings so long as they're accessible to the public. There is tons of case law about what does that mean, being accessible to the public, and some of them you would probably be just blown away by what some of these councils tried to do. For example, having a meeting at a private country club. This actually happened, where citizens, unless you were a member of the country club, you could not attend. Yeah, that doesn't meet the purpose of open meeting law. There were some where they would purposely schedule meetings in room with only 7 seats. That's also probably not a good idea. Here I can see, I think we're streaming as well, so that's fantastic. You've got, the streaming part, you also have it in person, but there's all sorts of examples of what not to do, but the core is people should be able to attend. Does that mean you have to have a seat for every single person? Probably not, but, I wish everybody would attend council meetings. I think they're super exciting, but but that's the core of it. So we also had some that were holding their meetings in a different state because it was summer and we're all going to be in San Diego. So let's just have our meeting in that doesn't work either. So so those are some of the examples. So what does it mean if open meeting law applies? And we'll kind of go over when it does apply, but the gist of it is the public should have notice of that meeting, and they should have an opportunity to know what will you be talking about as a public body. So having an agenda, getting the agenda in advance, knowing so that you can know kind of what will be talked about. And if the agenda says the meeting starts at 6 p.m., you can't start at 5:30. And the whole point is you want the public to have an opportunity to attend. Same thing, like we had meetings sometimes where, you have a work session and then you have the council meeting after, and the work session we thought might take an hour, it only took 15 minutes, so we're like, hey, can we start the regular council meeting ahead of time? No, if it said the regular meeting starts at whatever time, it can't start before that time. And that's where the clerk is critical and great at doing all of the notice and the agenda, and it's a lot of work. Sometimes we'll get questions like, how do you get something on the agenda? Each city and town is a little bit different. Some of them, it's the manager in consultation with the mayor. Some of it might be at the request of 2 council members. There are even some local codes that allow citizens to make a request, and if they have a certain number of people, they can add something to the agenda. So where do we find out how we can add something to the agenda? Your local code, usually in the first chapter, chapter 1, there will be usually a provision that talks about who can place or what the procedure is to place items on the agenda. That's where you would find your answer. My guess is your code might be online. So if you go on your town website, you could pull up your code. It's either usually Municode it's called, or American Legal Publishing. And then you can find out how to add something to the agenda if but again, what the code says, I bet if you talk to your local elected officials and really care about an issue, they can help you get that item on the agenda. So, oops, let me go back. I just want to make sure I didn't miss something here. So again, what is a meeting? So a meeting, for example, like your council, is anytime there's a quorum of your council is somewhere. And so if, let's say, you have a council that, in Arizona we have some councils are 5 members, but most of them are 7 members, so that would be 4. So if 4 of your council members are somewhere and they're discussing, legal action or contemplating legal action, open meeting law kicks in. What does that mean? essentially, if they're talking about something that could reasonably or foreseeably come before them for a decision, that's when open meeting law can kick in. If 4 of them are maybe at a restaurant and they're talking about a zoning case, open meeting law definitely would apply because it's something that will likely be on their council agenda. Does that mean they can never meet and talk about things outside of, let's say here, like on a regular meeting? No, it doesn't necessarily mean that. In some cases, you know, for example, a ribbon cutting, and I think that's one of the slides, but you know, council members will, they will attend events or new businesses in town. They can absolutely all attend, the entire council, as long as they provide the proper notice that there might be a quorum of the public body. And when they do attend that ribbon cutting, they're not talking about things that should be talked about here in the public meeting. You know, that they're not talking about a specific item that might be on the agenda or so forth. Or if they are gonna be maybe talking about it, that it is on the agenda listed as an item that they will discuss. So that's essentially the you know, when it will kick in. There's a little like checklist, like, you know, to determine, first you have to figure out, is it a public body? So if it was an elected official, a group of elected officials or appointed by council, it is a public body. You know, will they be discussing legal action? Is it something that could show up on their council agenda? And the question is, well, how do you know if it's something that might be on the agenda? Well, again, that's where the local code will say, these are the powers of your council and what they can decide on, and that can help guide. So if it's a zoning matter, if it's a contract, you know, those are the types of things that typically would go before council for approval, then that is the type of legal action. Did you want to add something?
I was going to add I think it's an interesting side note. So for counties in Arizona, where really all of their powers are stipulated in state law, the size of the Board of Supervisors is determined by the population of the county. So for our smallest counties, they have 3 supervisors. So 2 make up a quorum. So you can't have a conversation about policy, right? Because if you try to find out just what one other supervisor thinks needs to be done about X, you're now possibly discussing that would reasonably or foreseeably come before the board for discussion. And so I just imagine for any of you up there trying to you couldn't even have a conversation with one other elected official on any topic that might come before you. I do not envy those elected officials.
And I'm from a super small town in the middle of literally nowhere, Canada. I'm a dual citizen, that's why I speak funny, but I've been in Arizona for 26 years. But where I'm from, it was literally impossible to not run into your mayor, your council. Like, we had one coffee shop, we had one stop sign. It was impossible. But again, there's nothing wrong with them all being in the same spot, as long as they're not talking about things that they shouldn't be talking about, or that they should be talking about in a public meeting. So it's tough. It's very tough, and especially the smaller the community, because it seems like, of course, you're going to be talking about what's happening in town. So they always have to kind of have this fine line of, you know, I wouldn't want to be in their shoes. No one would elect me anyways, but but I definitely wouldn't want to be in those shoes. Did you want to say?
I think I saw a hand with
yeah,
a question.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, our council here goes to a ribbon cutting. Everybody goes.
Yeah.
Everybody leaves except 2. Can they talk to each other, and what can they not talk about?
So this literally just happened in Nogales. What happened is so the answer is yes, they can all go, as long as they provide, there's like clerks are aware of it.
I think you have a slide on it, right?
Yeah, I do. I have a slide. I'll share it. The image isn't great.
I got that part.
Yeah.
Public knows, but
So
everybody.
what can they talk about?
Okay, no, public, they go to ribbon cutting.
Yeah.
Out of the 7 council members, 5 of them take off, go home, do whatever they're gonna do. The other 2 stay and talk.
Talk about something that should be on the council agenda?
Well, I don't know. What can they not talk about?
Right. We're going to go through examples, but it's a great question because, so let's say they're talking about city business. And, you know, they shouldn't be doing that, but there's no quorum. They're talking about city business. Technically, they're not violating anything yet. But there's a thing in Arizona where they call them like serial meetings. If they start talking about what another council member told me, or if they later share and say, hey, I was talking to this other council member, And now they start communicating maybe the next day, or maybe it's a text message, and they say, hey, I was talking to this council member, and you know, he or she mentioned this and this and that. Now you got an issue, because if for Arizona law purposes, it doesn't matter whether you're all in the same room, it doesn't matter whether you're even in a room, it could be text messages, it could be social media posts. What matters is, are you communicating things about the agenda, and did you somehow get a quorum involved in that discussion? Whether it's at the same time or maybe later. So your question is spot on. For example, if I'll give you a real life example. We were in a council meeting, and a council member was tweeting. And two of the council members responded to his tweet during the council meeting, and it was about a developer. Let's just put it that way. Now you've got 3 council members, and you know, technically it's on social media, but social media is even more difficult, because how do you know, right? If, you know, what if a 4th council member, a quorum, sends it as a direct message? Or what if they just talk about it? Hey, did you see that council member said X, Y, and Z? So that's why we always say, like, if you can just avoid it altogether, do it in a public meeting. There's nothing wrong in doing it in a public meeting. And we've also had situations where the council member there's no bad intent. Let's say there's a resident that sends an email to a council member and says, hey, this other council member said this to me. You know, I'd like to know your position. You know, you know, there's no quorum and stuff, but there are situations where it's almost impossible for council members not, you know, to respond. And so what we would always tell, especially planning commission, I felt like there were a lot of planning commission where they might have questions about a zoning case, or a developer would reach out to the individual council members to say, you know, do you have any questions about the item on the agenda? Is there something you would like me to cover? And so what we would tell them is disclose it, just put it in the record. So if you're not sure, then just put it in the agenda packet or on the die, say, hey, I just want to put it out there that I had a discussion. There wasn't a quorum, but I had a discussion with a resident who shared something, you know, that was maybe mentioned by another council member, or maybe the citizen copied all the members of the board. We would try to put all that in the packet, just put the emails in the packet, or some sort of method for if people wanted to see kind of what the communications were. So I think those are so tricky, and that's why they keep lawyers in business, right? We write these laws so they're complicated, so you need us. But essentially, it's a case-by-case situation, and we always say, when in doubt, just disclose it. Just put it in the packet or disclose it.
I want to drill down just a little bit more with our council, or anybody that's on an elected position. What if you're buddies and you just want to go to lunch and you don't talk about it? Is perception a big deal?
So perception is not a violation of law, but again, the appearance of impropriety, you know, I mean, you know, you don't want to have the appearance of impropriety, but it's not a violation of the law. There might be some local code, or, because again, I'm talking about state law. There are some cities that have adopted like stricter requirements. The issue with that is it's always enforcement, right? They adopt these codes, but no one's really enforcing them, or no one really knows how to enforce them. So they don't typically work, those policies or provisions. At least the ones I've seen, they end up just being very expensive, because they have to hire, you know, third-party investigators or whatever it is. But I mean, they're great questions, but appearance is not a violation of the law. So. And
I guess I would say anecdotally, you know, especially if you've been on council a long time, you become friends, you make friendships. Now, we have had instances in Arizona in the past where a council meeting would end and the entire council would want to go to dinner together. I would advise against that. That to me maybe doesn't pass the headline test. But I haven't, again, anecdotally, I am not an attorney at all, so I certainly can't be your attorney. You know, 2 friends who've been on council for, you know, 12 years, you know, is that gonna ruffle feathers? I don't know. I think when it's a larger group, especially if it was a quorum, I think that might raise some eyebrows. But I think if it's 2 or 3 and it's not a quorum and it's known that they're buddies and they golf together and they're talking about how bad the Cardinals are and I'm glad they fired their coach. And it's clear that they're not talking about town business.
Yeah, and it's so, I mean, that's the part, it's so difficult. And that the example in Nogales, basically they did all the notice requirements that said, a notice of a potential forum that they were going to visit. I think it was like a site for a potential mine. They posted the notice of a potential forum, but the issue was there had been a quorum. They did talk about city business. They hadn't put it as a potential item specifically that they would be discussing. They didn't put minutes because obviously they were just kind of casual. So the AG did determine that they violated open meeting law because it's not enough to just say there might be a quorum. If there's a quorum, you better, put on that notice what exactly you're going to be talking about and not making any type of decisions or discussions that you're deliberating on some sort of thing that will be on the agenda. So they meant well. They just didn't quite, the AG didn't, found a violation. The other part about open meeting law, we'll kind of go over that, is, the whole point of open meeting law too is compliance. And so one thing I think everyone needs to kind of realize is that a lot of council members and planning commissioners and people who serve on these subcommittees, they have full-time jobs. So a lot of them are doing this, as citizens, and you don't get a manual that tells you this is how you govern or this is how. So a lot of times, like a lot of this, when you're talking about like a perfect example is like, is it a quorum? Is it not a quorum? When there are complaints, the Attorney General first tries to educate. If that fails, then there might be sanctions. But the first step is to make sure, like, did this person? Because some of our planning commissioners, they might have done the training, but until you start practicing these things, it's kind of hard. But the goal is to comply, to educate, and then seek. If it's something intentional, we'll kind of go over that, but that the AG will not tolerate. But this is a video. I'm not sure if it's going to work, but this is an example of like the question from the.
If you've been hurt in an accident, who you choose to represent you matters. Being part of your community matters. Their winning record and level of care matters. The trial attorneys at Sweet James are some of the best in the country, consistently delivering some of the top settlements in the state. Not only do we win big.
Some politicians think that they work for themselves. They work for the people who elected them.
A Hamilton County judge says text messages sent between 5 Cincinnati City Council members will be released. This is part of a lawsuit claiming the group texts broke the law. And good afternoon once again, everyone. Judge Robert Ruhlman ruled during a hearing on the lawsuit.
Yeah, the so-called Gang of Five hired an army of lawyers to try to keep those messages under wraps. Anjanette Levy is here to explain exactly what happened here today. Anjanette?
Well, Kyle, Cincinnati's city charter says meetings among a majority of council members must be public. Attorney Brian Shrives says the self-proclaimed Gang of Five broke meetings laws when they started texting each other about city business earlier this year.
10 lawyers crowded Judge Ruhlman's courtroom to argue about text messages. The Gang of Five, council members P.G. Sittenfeld, Chris Seelbach, Tamaya Denard, Wendell Young, and Greg Landsman, hired the lawyers to keep the messages secret. City business and more was discussed on the text messages, including how to protect city manager Harry Black from being fired.
This is a fishing expedition to do an open meetings audit. I would take plaintiff at their word. That's exactly what they're doing here.
Last Friday afternoon, the Gang of Five released some of those messages to only a couple of reporters, claiming they were turning over what was required for the lawsuit. Attorney Brian Shrives said it was a maneuver that failed.
Their clients have shown that they are unable to be trusted to respond to discovery when they release these text messages at in these Friday document dumps.
A friend of the Gang of Five, Derek Bauman, tried to intervene in the lawsuit, claiming Vice Mayor Christopher Smitherman violated open meetings laws by texting about city business. Smitherman's lawyer disagreed.
It's more of a philosophical back and forth with one other council member. We would submit that, Judge, under the Ohio Public Meetings Act, that isn't even close to a public meeting.
Judge Ruhlman agreed and said that Smitherman would not become part of the lawsuit. The city also tried to limit the texts that would be turned over.
All communications between any two council members from January 1 to April 1 that you right now can say, that is absolutely too
Well,
broad.
these were on their private devices. They weren't on the city-issued devices. And of course, this is Ohio law, and they even had like specific things in their city charter. But for the purpose of open meeting law, it doesn't matter whether it's a private device, a public device, or a town-issued device, a private social media page that's closed and only, has access to certain members of the council. The nature of where it's at does not matter. If they're talking about city business and they're communicating with another council member, that's when open meeting law can kick in, whether it's a town device or not. So the important part about that is, if as an elected official or appointed official, if you are using and there's nothing wrong with using a city-issued device for city business, but if you are going to do that, now you have an obligation to retain those records. And that gets pretty complicated when you're talking about social media, when you're talking about text messages. And so we would always advise council members, keep them separate, because you don't want us to have to sift through all your private messages to figure out which one might be public and which one might be not. So just keep them separate. It's easy to say, but sometimes it's difficult, especially if a city gives a stipend for a cell phone and your private device is what you're using for both. But those are some of the challenges that are really kind of difficult for elected and appointed officials to deal with.
Let me see if I can help.
And there are tons of Attorney General opinions. I included links in there that kind of talk about these simultaneous type of discussions or interactions online. In Arizona, we don't have case law on it. Everything we have so far are Attorney General opinions. And thankfully, we haven't really had any, conduct that's been subject to lawsuits. I'm hoping it's because everyone's behaving, but I mean, I don't know. But so we don't really have a lot of case law to help guide us. So a lot of the things we've kind of used as examples for for training purposes is based on the Attorney General opinions, and then just from other states, which makes it kind of difficult. But here are some of the examples. I won't go through all of them because I've got shortness on time. But this was another video. You can skip that one too. If I just go.
You can just skip through it.
Okay, perfect. There you go. Here's the ribbon cutting example. So we kind of talked about that. This is the Nogales. This was the notice they posted at the front of City Hall, but they didn't publish it in the newspaper. And of course, like we talked about, they did talk about city business, so the notice of a potential forum was kind of useless. Here's the social media part, and this is another part. This is purely based on case law in other states. We've seen cases where a council member didn't necessarily respond to a social media post, but they liked the comment, or maybe they befriended all the members on the council, or maybe they joined these Facebook groups. Because sometimes, council members want to hear, like, what's the community saying about, like, a road project. There's nothing wrong with them getting that information, but once they start posting in some of these groups, that's where it might kick in. Might not necessarily kick in. But if a quorum responds or is somehow communicating that to a quorum, that's where you might run into issues. So it's really tricky, the social media. State law is not clear, so it's very fuzzy right now.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Nancy, but the scary, tricky part of that too is if, I think in pop culture, so I think of REO Speedwagon, right? Heard it from a friend. So
no, sing it. Can you sing it?
No. So you could have council member 1 post something on social media, and without their knowledge, post it on X. And so without their knowledge, council member 2 can repost that. And then council member 3 can screenshot that and text it to council member 4. and now council member one is involved in a forum completely unbeknownst to them, correct?
Right. And the other thing is, I'm sure the town manager, you know, he probably gets citizen compliments all the time. And maybe he wants to share the compliments with the council. There's nothing wrong with him sending an email to all the council saying, look at this awesome compliment I got from a resident. The issue is if one of them responds, they need to be careful, because if they reply to all, they've just replied to a form. If they reply to one council member, I don't know why you would do that, or maybe just reply to the manager, that's fine, there's no form. But when they click that reply all, that's where the problem happens. So, do you like that example? I bet you like it.
So many compliments.
Yeah, that's it, only compliments. Which is something we covered here, but executive sessions. So executive sessions.
Yeah, the head.
Oh, I do, sorry, yes.
No, you know, you talk about small towns, we're a small town. We all have different roles. And for example, the mayor has an official Facebook account, and then she has a personal account.
Right.
Ooh,
Right.
I like where this is
Oh,
going.
it gets even trickier. There's a difference between the personal, the official town page, and the campaign page.
But yeah,
And
go ahead, but keep going.
go for it, go for it.
No, yeah, the question is, how does the rules and the law look at
Oh, that's a
Great question. And the U.S. Supreme Court actually issued a clear decision on this, which is very rare. Usually it's like, what just happened?
I'm going to put in a compliment about you.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a
It
great
wasn't in
question.
the context of open meeting law. It was in the context of a First Amendment issue, because the town manager, I think it was town manager, maybe it was the mayor, had blocked someone. So it was a little bit different, but essentially there's nothing wrong with them having separate pages, and a lot of cities will have an official page and will have some sort of council policy that says, like if we had one in Gilbert, when we were in Gilbert, that the council agreed that the mayor would be the one to speak on that page. So it kind of depends city by city. But if it is an official page and these are things that are being communicated to the public, then that's a public record. It might not be subject to open meeting law in the sense, if you don't have council members or quorum communicating on that page, because a one-way communication alone is not open meeting law issue. But it is a public record. So if you want to find out what messages were sent to that, the public page, it's probably going to be something they have to disclose as a public record, if that makes sense.
But
Just as a note, though, the town of Superior has been aware of this Attorney General opinion for a while, so we pay for backups of all of the council members' social media posts, so they're always in compliance if they have a social media. Many of them don't have them, so they don't use the service. But if you do have social media, the town for free will back it all up, and we do that for most councilmen.
Yeah, and there's, again, becoming an elected official definitely does not mean they lose their First Amendment right. They do have rights, I want to complain about my hockey team, and I'm an elected official, I can complain about it. But they don't lose their First Amendment rights. They even have greater rights when they're speaking as a candidate. Courts have said that is the greatest First Amendment right that exists, is when they're speaking as candidates. They have that tough part of navigating those roles where they're wearing private versus public and so forth. So, but that's a great question. It's tricky, and it doesn't matter if the private page, even if it's called private, if the council is communicating a quorum on that page, open meeting law applies, right? So yeah.
I wanted to highlight to another small point of that. If you allow debate on a public issue on your Facebook page, it now becomes a public forum. You can't block people from it. You can't restrict access. And there are only certain things, like the town has adopted a set of rules saying that if they cuss at you, if they threaten you, then you can hide that content. But blocking it is probably verboten if you have allowed a discourse on that page in the past.
that's also Supreme Court case law.
It's also Supreme Court. It is really difficult for a city to hide comments, block citizens. Unfortunately, there is a Supreme Court case but it's still not super clear in some cases. Did we create a public forum? Is it a limited public forum? I could talk about this for 3 hours, like this is my baby. I love the First Amendment, but it's not black and white. Let's put it that way, but and it gets tricky, but blocking is really, really difficult, really difficult. And typically cities will have a policy, and you know, it's sometimes it's really awful because sometimes unless there's like actual threats of physical harm, you know, it's really, really difficult. We have, you know, citizens that will complain about certain employees and like put stuff online about their families, and it's just really difficult. And a lot of it is we can't really block it or hide it, or so tricky. So executive.
We're in the home stretch.
Yeah. So we're almost. So the executive sessions essentially. There are 9 exceptions to when council members can have a public meeting or have a meeting amongst a quorum, but do it behind closed doors. And those are they're specific and they're listed in statute. So examples include things like for the purpose of like discussing, you know, getting legal advice from the attorney, stuff that's pretty obvious, or you know, if a city wants to eminently domain certain land, or maybe wants to sell land, they want to kind of talk about what their negotiation points are, or employment contracts.
Or like critical infrastructure,
Critical
right?
infrastructure.
You don't want to tell terrorists what they shouldn't attack, right?
Exactly. So those are very specific exceptions. It has to be still listed on the agenda. They're obviously not going to say specifically what that item is that they're discussing. They need to kind of give a general idea of what the item is about, but the important part about that is everything that happens within the executive session is strictly confidential. Whether it's a discussion with the attorney or not, anything in executive session is confidential. There's only very limited exceptions where those minutes or what occurred in the meeting can be disclosed, and none of them include anything about any council member like waiving that confidentiality. So the only times is if there's a complaint, the AG can look at the minutes and stuff. We still take minutes, they're just held confidentially. And so, did I put anything here? And of course, they can't take legal action in council. They can't like make a decision technically during the executive session. There's a case that's happening right now. Well, not anymore, but City of Flagstaff was involved in a case where they were talking about potential litigation, and the council did authorize the city attorney to pursue litigation if certain things happen. So it was kind of like a, and we always thought that there was authority to do that. At least most attorneys thought that there was authority to provide direction to an attorney during these executive sessions related to litigation, but the Court of Appeals disagreed and said anytime, and this is even though Flagstaff had specific provisions in their charter that allowed the city attorney on his own to initiate litigation. So we wrote an amicus brief, the league, in support of Flagstaff, because we felt like we didn't understand how the court, you know, got to where it did. But unfortunately, the Arizona Supreme Court denied review, so the decision stands. So now all litigation has to be authorized in public. There might be an amendment to the statute this session. We'll see if there's a bill. But I know there's a lot of public entities that, because sometimes it's not black and white. Sometimes it's if they don't accept this offer, or if they don't remove this nuisance from our property, then initiate litigation. So sometimes, or it's settlement discussions, like how much are we willing to accept as a settlement for a claim, like, or, you know, things like that, where why would that, you know, all it does is harm the public, because ultimately when a city is in litigation, they're doing it on behalf of their citizens. So if we're kind of showing our cards in litigation, if we have a company that comes and destroys all this land and we're talking about litigation, like some of it, we don't want them to see all of our litigation strategies, or at least not while it's pending. You know, if after the fact they want that to be disclosed, I mean, that's public records, but anyway, so those are some of the exceptions to open meeting law. Again, yes, sir.
Back on the executive session, with the exception, if you have an executive session that's dealing with staff issue or a member of the staff,
right,
and they say, I don't want you to discuss your issue executive session. We're gonna waive that to the open session.
So there's, one of the exceptions is basically if you're gonna be talking about promoting or demoting or an employee, you have to give them notice, ahead of the executive session, and they have the right to request that it be conducted in public. I think that's kind of what they're talking about. We should teach it.
Those are only council appointed positions, and there's only 4 of them in town. So our code is very simple. It's based on the model city code from the League of Cities and Towns from the 70s. There's not a lot of specific stipulations in our code that are separate from anything that the state has adopted. So there's not a lot of complexity or nuance to our code, which makes it better because you don't have to research 3 sources whenever one of these things comes.
So, and that's critical. So not every city's the same. Some cities, it's the manager that appoints, let's say the fire chief or the police chief, or, but others it's council. So like, if it's not like a position of a public employee, council probably wouldn't be discussing that employee in the first place. But you always have to remember, it depends on what your particular council has as authority. And if that particular employee might not necessarily be of your council's appointment. So let's see. So this is the Flagstaff case. In terms of enforcement, any citizen, whether they live in your town or not, can file a complaint for open meeting law violations, which is kind of weird, you know, because you would think it would be limited to just those residents, but anyone can file a complaint. The AG can investigate complaints. Like I was saying, a lot of it is, when it comes to the AG investigation, is about compliance and just making sure to educate that public body. A lot of times they'll send them to training, or they'll try different things as long as there's like any type of intentional conduct. And again, the potential penalties are really severe. It can include removal from office. Your council member or whoever, even your planning commission member, can be liable for damages. There's different types of penalties, and the penalty can be pretty severe up to felonies if there's any proof that it was intentional. So it can be pretty bad. And in terms of like the city taxpayers paying for this, the council first has to, if they are going to pay for the legal services, they have to authorize that in a public meeting. So if they are going to hire, and I'm talking about outside counsel, not inside counsel, but if they're hiring someone on the outside to defend an open meeting law violation, they have to authorize that expense, which they probably do anyways, because that's typically something they would authorize.
But speaking of open meeting law, we're coming up on our hour.
Okay, yep. And so this is the fun stuff, the penalties. But and the other part is, if there's any type of intent, the city can't pay those penalties on behalf of the individual that violated open meeting law. So they're on the hook for those individual penalties. And I think the other part I want to make sure we talk about is, you can fix open meeting law if there are mistakes by ratifying. So for example, if let's say a council approves a contract or approves something that required, you know, a supermajority vote, you know, or 2/3 vote, or whatever it is, and they didn't do it the right way, or they didn't put it on the agenda properly, they can fix that mistake so long as they put it on the next agenda and they basically redo it. So this like kind of talks about fixing open meeting law violations. That Flagstaff case, ratification was an issue, and the council had tried to fix their mistake by putting it on the agenda and saying we authorize litigation, but the court said they didn't do it in a timely fashion, because I think it was like 8 months later or 9 months later that they ratified it, so that was too late. So those are kind of that's kind of it. And the rest of this will kind of go over things like the slides will be available, but it'll talk about things like calls to the public. Again, they're not mandatory, but if cities do have them, there's only certain ways that each individual council member can respond to comments from the public, and so it kind of goes over that. And I don't know if there's any other questions or comments.
Conflict of interest?
It's in there too. I put conflicts of interest, like not all of them, but the big ones. And then what else did we put? We put the annual council meeting, public records, because it kind of all connects together, so,
And we will
Some
share
light
this.
reading to put you to
Yeah.
bed tonight.
I was gonna say, we'll make sure that the slides are available to all of our commission members and council members. I know, lots of our council engages some of the other classes, but I'd like to thank Nancy and Renee for coming out. I do wanna be mindful of everyone's time, so, unless anybody really needs a 5-minute break, we'll adjourn this meeting and then move on, council. Does council have any questions for Nancy and Renee before we adjourn this?
Thank you.
Thank you all, thank you all. Grab some. All right, we have a motion to adjourn this meeting. There's a motion by Councilmember Conlon, is there a second? Second by Vice Mayor Alonso, all in favor? Aye, any opposed? Motion carries. We're going to call to order our regular town council meeting at 7:02 PM. Call to order Councilmember Land, or roll call, Councilmember Land.
Here.